you talked a lot about knowledge. I was wondering if you might be able to share your thoughts on then maybe on the opposite side of the spectrum. What is wisdom?
So I think that there's knowledge, which is, like the laws and all of the things of the universe and nature. And then there are things that are, I would say, divinely given to us, or maybe even guided to us, much like what we were talking about earlier with me. Sometimes I say things and like in my podcast and I go back and listen to it. I'm like, I don't think I was the one saying that. Like, I don't remember saying that. So it's like somebody else is driving and I'm just a passenger looking out the window while it's all happening. And
Huh.
for a lot of people, I think that that's the same thing. Like, I don't know if you're familiar with the book of Urantia,
Hmm.
but that's a real good one. That's a real brain melter. But if you think about like in that book they refer to the thought dweller or the thought adjuster. I think that this is something we don't understand yet, but I think that there is a piece of our soul that is directly connected to our mind or brain, and then our heart, and then our spiritual heart. Our physical heart is something that pumps blood and keeps our body alive, and our brain is something that sends electrodes to the rest of our body to make it move and do things. But then there's the mind, right? And then the spiritual heart. That is something science can't definitively explain yet. We can't really definitively explain some of these things. And where I think that comes into play is what we don't understand about the universal creator or God, whatever you want to call it. And that is what is, because underneath this, right? And I think that most people, no matter what religion would say, no matter what you believe, most people in religion believe you have a soul. Now, we can't prove that necessarily with science yet, but we do think and believe there is a soul. And to me, the soul is a piece of God. And some religions really touch on that and kind of explain that. So what that means to me is that soul, that piece of God that is in us, is actually God. The only thing that keeps us separate from it or makes us think that there's anything else is our ego, which is something that we develop and build over time, of parents telling us who we are, our teachers, friends telling us who we are, what we like. And that's the illusion. Underneath, we're all the same. Like, what would it look like if we didn't have any of those outside influences and we all grew up and lived in the same commune and were taught the same things and developed without any social influence or guidance? I think we would be looking at a very different, interesting place. And I think these places that you're talking about, like ancient Egypt and ancient Hindu, Atlantis, Lemuria, I think this is what they knew. I think that's the secret, quote unquote, the taboo that they knew, is who we truly are underneath.
Hmm. So based on what you said, and then this was also like coupling with a couple things in my head because it kind of you really triggered some interesting ideas about like knowledge and wisdom, because those are often purported as like a yin and yang, and even on like the tree of life, that's a kind of like the top two sefirot outside of like the crown or the universal understanding and everything is knowledge, wisdom, and understanding are all kind of there. And so I'm what you made me think of was that maybe like the way we could see it potentially, tell me if this resonates, is that wisdom is like the flow of creation from the source, whatever, however we define source, God, consciousness, and the all. The wisdom is like all things flowing from that you can tap into and say miraculous things or you do miraculous things when you're tapped into like the wisdom. But when you stop and you actually try to like analyze the information in like the wisdom created the universe, and like let's actually analyze the universe, now we're getting into knowledge, like understanding like how things work in a more of a practical or a mathematical formulaic way. But we have to also see that it's a part of a continuity. Like gravity does not exist in isolation. The laws of physics do not exist by themselves. And when you trace them all back to their origin, they all emerge from a singular idea, or as the Hermetics would say, like a thought within the mind of God or something like that. I mean, how does that idea resonate to you?
Yeah, I think that it's true. And I think that right now in 2020, our perception is what creates reality, but that's not the real reality. I think that what we're experiencing is a direct result of amnesia and confusion of who we think we are, but we're not. which has guided us in our, wrong way. But again, it's all part of the plan. So it's not necessarily wrong. It's just that maybe we were there already and then we kind of forgot ourselves along the way. And now we're in the rebound of kind of getting back to that place. So that's kind of how I see that situation. But what I think is that our selves, it's like the Akashic record, right? I think that all of that knowledge and all of that wisdom is already within us. And as I think that part of why we don't fully have a concept or understanding of it is because of our mortal existence on Earth. It probably is probably too much for us to handle all at once, without some type of leveling up, you might even say, or like stepping up into, we hear that term downloads a lot lately, especially within the last couple of years. We hear the term downloads. And I think that that is probably true and probably almost necessary. I think that our way of being and thinking, I mean, we're still basically cavemen, as much as like we'd like to think we're evolved and stuff, the reality is there's probably ETs that can travel to and from galaxies in nanoseconds, and we're still trying to shoot metal up into space, so I mean, we're not as advanced as we like to think we are, and anybody that argues with that is talking from an egotistical perspective. Yes, we have fancy computers. Yes, we have iPhones, and those are wonderful. But who says we haven't already had that? Who says that we weren't even more advanced in another time, in another place? And that's a topic for another conversation. But I think that what is better than all of that is what lies in the Akashic record, and which has been yet to really fully understand. But we do know that people can tap into it. People have written books about it. People have had documentaries on it. We know that that exists. And what that seems to be is almost like this, a spiritual realm for the Library of Alexandria. And who's to say the Library of Alexandria wasn't a physical place where the two met, like maybe the, Library of Alexandria was a place where people could, astrally project into the Akashic record to attain more knowledge and wisdom. But, what we do know is that it seems to be that only certain bits of information are required at certain points in time, right? If we were able to just go to the Akashic record, and there would have been people who would have done it already and attained all the knowledge and shared it with everyone. But there's probably a reason why we don't have that. There's probably a reason why we don't need it yet, because in the future, we need to learn something, or we need to get there to be able to handle it. Much like what we assume would be the problem with learning about ETs. We think that humans can't handle it. It would shatter their whatever they believe to be the real existence. So I think it's similar in that fashion.
Yeah. What you just also reminded me of too is I think there's a challenge between not being able to clearly, properly identify what is authentic information, right? Because and maybe all of it is, but from the basis of there's people who channelers go to the Akashic records, and they get this whole book. The Urantia book is a good example, right? And the history of humanity according to the Urantia book is a very, very interesting rendition. But then you go over here to a different channeler and a different experience or different story, and you get an entirely different telling, the raw material, the law of one raw material, there's very different perspectives. So then you start looking at all these, and people kind of just generally, I feel like they'll go well, this one resonates, maybe this one doesn't, and that's just, maybe it's based on their own preference or some feeling that they have, but there's not a way for us to, at least collectively in this moment, definitively say this is the real truth, right? So there's kind of just we're all just looking and learning and exploring and discussing and trying to identify, but I think maybe as time goes on, if we can get a more of a for lack of a better word, grounded perspective or experience of this ethereal, mystical reality, maybe we can get a little bit more of a collective idea and understanding of what truth really is. Because that's I mean, it's especially difficult on the internet right now. Maybe this is the whole thing. Maybe the Akashic records are like the internet, and whatever you want to believe, you can find the story that supports it. Because if you want to believe the earth is round, flat, or hollow, the answer on the internet is undoubtedly yes, and all of the other perspectives are wrong, depending on who you ask. Right? So maybe Akashic records are the same thing. It's just the answer is always yes, because it's this infinite multiverse, and we have this really nice, like limited, simple reality of like I have one body and I'm going through my life linearly, but it's like maybe that's because that's what we can handle right now, because the moment you step up into the next dimension, it's like now you have 20,000 infinite levels of bodies at multiverse, throughout the multiverse, and you can move all of them independently, and there's all these different, like, it's just like too much for any person at this level of consciousness to be able to handle. So it's like, let's just like keep us limited, keep us growing until we get to the point where we can do the multiverse thing.